Good morning, Year 4. Our English lesson today, we are moving on to a new section of Charlotte's Web, and that's a part of the story that we haven't read yet. So we're going to use video clips from the movie to help us a lot today, to move us forward in the story, so we are at the point that we want to be at, because we're going to be writing a newspaper article by the end of next week. So your book will look something like this today. And we have our success criteria, and it is Monday the 1st of February. So, first of all, I want you to go off of this video, and if you look at the website, there is a video clip to watch of Charlotte's Web. Okay, and once you've watched this video, we're going to answer some Vipers questions about what we have seen. So pause this video and go and watch the clip from the movie. Okay then, so we now have some Vipers questions to answer about what we have just seen. We have a number the events in the order they occur, so you are summarising. So just popping numbers into the boxes to tell me what order it happens in. We are talking about the vocabulary and what that tells us. And we're picking out evidence to help us with the last two questions. So pause the video and have a go now. Okay then, Year 4. So moving on, we are going to read chapter 11. We've got Roman numerals here, chapter 11. So I will read it to you, or you can pause the video and read it to yourself. And we're going to be thinking about vocabulary when this video ends, so you can be listening for that key vocabulary whilst I read. So, chapter 11, The Miracle. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. On foggy mornings, Charlotte's Web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery, like a delicate veil. Even Levy, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. He noted how clearly it showed up, and he noted how big and carefully built it was. And then he took another look down, and he saw something that made him set his pail down. There, in the centre of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message. It said, "Some pig." Levy felt weak. He brushed his hand across his eyes and stared even harder at Charlotte's Web. "I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you'd better come down to the pig pen," he said. "What's the trouble?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with the pig?" "Not exactly," said Levy. "Come and see for yourself." The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Levy pointed to the spider's web. "Do you see what I see?" he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing on the web. Then he murmured the words, "Some pig." Then he looked at Levy. Then they both began to tremble. Charlotte, sleepy after her night's exertions, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. "Some pig," muttered Levy in a low voice. "Some pig," whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur. Then they stared at Charlotte. "You don't suppose that spider—" began Mr. Zuckerman. But he shook his head and didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back up to the house and spoke to his wife. "Edith, something has happened," he said in a weak voice. He went into the living room and sat down, and Mrs. Zuckerman followed. "I've got something to tell you, Edith," he said. "You better sit down." Mrs. Zuckerman sank into a chair. She looked pale and frightened. "Edith," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think you had best be told that we have a very unusual pig." A look of complete bewilderment came over Mrs. Zuckerman's face. "Homer Zuckerman, what in the world are you talking about?" she said. "This is a very serious thing, Edith," he replied. "Our pig is completely out of the ordinary." "What's unusual about the pig?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who was beginning to recover from her scare. "Well, I don't really know yet," said Mr. Zuckerman, "but we have received a sign, Edith, a mysterious sign. A miracle has happened on this farm. There was a large spider's web in the doorway of the barn cellar, right over the pig pen, and when Levy went to feed the pig this morning, he noticed the web because it was foggy. And you know how a spider's web looks very distinct in a fog. And right sprang in the middle of the web, there were the words, "Some pig." The words were woven right into the web. They were actually part of the web, Edith. I know because I've been down there and seen them. It says "some pig," just as clear can be. There can be no mistake about it. A miracle has happened and a sign has occurred here on earth, right on our farm, and we have no ordinary pig. Well, said Mrs. Zuckerman, it seems to me you're a little off. It seems to me we have no ordinary spider. Okay, so I want you to go back through the part of chapter 11 we have read, and I want you to pick out any high-level vocabulary you think is really nice that has described anything that's gone on in these few pages. Okay, so pause the video and then we'll have a little talk about what vocab you may have picked out. So then, the vocab I picked out, I found a thing of beauty, tiny beads, so it was talking about tiny beads of water on the spider web. Uttered, because when we're feeling shocked, we might utter something or whisper something. Solemnly, delicate veil, that's a lovely description of the spider's web. It was glistening in the light. The men were trembling when they found it. They felt bewilderment. The web was carefully built. It was distinct and it was woven, and they described it as being like a miracle. So well done if you picked out any nice vocabulary, such as those words there. Okay, so the next task you are going to do is I want you to sequence the plot from Levy's perspective. So we're thinking about what Levy saw. So what is the first thing that he did at the beginning of this chapter? Well, he went to the pig pen with Wilbur's breakfast. Okay, so that's my first part of Levy's story in this chapter. Then what happened next? So we are sequencing exactly what Levy has experienced in this chapter so far. So pause the video and have a think about what else could be in your 5 bullet points. Okay, so after he took Wilbur's breakfast, he saw the spider web and he read the words "some pig." Okay, and he was quite shocked by this, wasn't he? So he felt shocked and he fell to his knees and he said a prayer, didn't he, as well? And then he went to get Mr. Zuckerman. And he was equally as shocked, wasn't he? And then finally, they went to tell Mrs. Zuckerman. Okay, so hopefully you have got something along these lines telling me what Levy experienced in this chapter so far. And this is going to help you for your final task today. So you are going to write a diary entry as Levy, telling me exactly what you saw. So you are Levy. So you are writing in the first person. You are writing in chronological order. So remember that means time order. You are telling me about your feelings, and you might use some show not tell here that we used last week. You will use paragraphs because remember that we have our overview for our first paragraph. Our main body tells us what happened in chronological order and how we felt about it. And our final paragraph gives us a hope sentence, so something about looking forward to the future. And then we're going to use some fronted adverbials to link our ideas together. So then, you are going to start your diary entry. And of course, we start with an exclamation sentence. So, dear diary, what a surprising day. Now we need an overview of what has happened. So, it's a little bit too long for the line. When I popped down to the pig pen to feed Wilbur, I was met with a complete miracle. Okay, so I'm using my vocabulary. Let me tell you more. Okay, so there's my first paragraph summarising an overview of what has happened. So I'm going to use a front adverbial. Early this morning when beads of water were trickling from the cobwebs, I wandered down to the pig pen to feed the animals. I'm talking about my feelings now because it's a diary entry. So I felt exhausted because it was so early in the day. I hardly noticed when, above my head, I spotted a glistening spider's web. Okay, so I have started off my diary entry. I've thought about my exclamation sentence and my overview. And then I've used a fronted adverbial and my first person to describe what has happened. I've mentioned how I am feeling. And I'm just reading it through to check it makes sense. I hardly noticed what was going on when above my head I spotted a glistening spider's web. So now I'd go on to talk about seeing how it said some pig, how I felt about this, how I reacted using show not tell. Okay, so I want you to continue with your diary entry. You can write your own or you can magpie from mine to help you to begin with. Okay, and when you finish, don't forget to send your work to your teacher.